So I'm on Boardman Street, and then I hit next. And I don't even bother with the information on this page. I just go down to the very bottom and then I say next. And then if there's something for your house that's already been done, you'll see it on this page. There might be an inventory number, and you might see these little INVs, inventory forms right there. So on the left, I'll click on the inventory number, and it brings up some basic information about the house I'm looking for. So there's a picture, an old picture. It gives the address, and then it says year constructed 1750. What I have found with these Macris reports is they are not 100% reliable. The information can be accurate, but there's a lot of information that's not accurate. So when I get the information, I definitely, it's a help, but it's not always the right answer. For instance, this said it was the year constructed is around 1750. It really was closer to 1800. So again, just kind of take that information for what it is, and we'll be using other sources to get the actual information. So notice that there are three buttons on the page. There's an INV up at the top, and then down here below. The ones down below are really cool because they give you information about the area. So Boardman and Washington Street. So this gives a whole bunch of information about the entire area. Has some pictures of other houses. It has kind of a general description of who was living here during that time. So so there's some really good information. And then of course there's another one that's just of Newburyport history. So if you just are interested in basic Newburyport history, this is a great place to begin. But for the house I'm looking at, 29, I'm going to click the INV. And it doesn't look like anything is happening, because what it's doing is it's downloading. If you notice down here on the left, on the bottom tab, it's downloading a PDF to my computer, and then I can open it up. So here's the information that would be in it. You know, somebody went and they, went by the house, they took a picture of the house, and then they wrote some information. I think sometimes they may have written the information after they had gone back to the office, because, here it says there's one chimney, but there are 4 chimneys. And, so I have found that some of this written information isn't completely accurate. And it has a little description of, where it is relative to other houses. And then sometimes if you really get lucky, they have a nice description down here in this brief description. And generally, they don't go beyond or earlier than 1851. I think the people who researched them took some of the research back to that 1851 map. And so that's kind of where they end up. So if your house is older than that, these generally don't have who the original builder was of your house. So the Macris reports, I found, I would say 50% of the time, maybe there's something about a house, but, and then the other half, there wouldn't be anything. So Macris is kind of the first place to begin. And I'm going to turn on a pointer here just so you can see my cursor a little bit better. The second source that I like to go to right away is the map of 1851. And I'm thinking many of you have already seen this. This is the old survey. And if you click on it, you can kind of zoom in on your part of town. And I do find this map really helpful. So here, here's Boardman Street. And, so it has the names of the people who were living in the house as of that time. Many times it's the owner of the house, but sometimes it was people who just lived there. So again, it's helpful information, but it's not always 100% accurate. And then the names can sometimes be misspelled, or they might appear on a different property. So, but this map of 1851 is always a really, really great map to get started for sure. Another one, many of you may know Mary Baker. She is a Newburyport resident and a lover of history. And so she started a passion project about, I don't know, about a year ago maybe. And what she's done is she's created a little Google map, and she has found information on houses in Newburyport, places around town, events that happen in the area, different types of streets, and then she's plotted it on this Google map. And so, you know, if you go to, she has all of these houses already, some information. It may not necessarily be the complete history of the house, but she might have some interesting information, for instance, about a famous person who lived there. So this 53 Kent Street, there was a person named Ethel Reed, and you click on it and it tells you a little bit more about who Ethel Reed was. So she's getting into a little more of the personal side of some of these homes, but it's a really fascinating project and a great place to look for some information about Newburyport. And then finally, the last thing would be your house deed. So really, for the work that I do, I'm using the deeds as my primary source through the entire search. And then I go to my other sources kind of as I need to fill in. And so the deeds are your kind of that primary place that you need to use to find out who actually built your house. So before I ever start doing the research, you definitely want to keep track of what you've done. So I always like using a spreadsheet, but you could just use a piece of paper or a Word document. But the information that I generally keep would be the names of the grantor and grantee, the book and page from Salem Deeds that you can find the deed on, the date that it was signed, and then I always like to keep notes as things change or if there's something that kind of pops out about the information.
Hey, Barb, before you get into the detail of the deeds, Mark and Melissa have a question about whether the 1851 map goes further, shows areas further from downtown.
So let me come back to the 1851 map. So the 1851 map goes over here to Woodland, a little bit beyond Woodland up here to this little area. I think that's in the past Belleville. Yeah, in the Belleville area. And then on the east side, it goes over to Marlboro, but doesn't quite hit the end of Marlboro.
Doesn't quite hit my house.
Doesn't quite hit, yeah. And then it shows a few other places. There are some other maps that I'll show you later. Most of them are not as old as this. There is one other map that shows a little bit more down between High and Low Street. And I think it's like around 1870. But I'll share the other maps as we go further along.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Jack. That's a great way of doing it. So keeping track of your information, and then Salem Deeds. This is kind of the primary place to get to your house, to the answer of when your house was actually built. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to show you kind of how this works, just so you can see, because there are a lot of tabs in there. So when I go into the Salem Deeds Registry, I always use this box on the right. And you see a lot of tabs here. If you know the book and page that your deed is listed on, you can go directly to this book and page tab right there, and then just enter your book and page, and I'll show you that in a second. If you don't know that, you can certainly search your house by your street. You can put in the dates, the date range, or when you bought your house. For town, you would say Newburyport, you put in your street, and then you can search. You can also search by name. So you could also just type in your last name and your first name, and it will find that information as well. So I'm just going to go over here to the book and page search, and I'm going to type one in, 6697. And this is part of my deed chain, and I just wanted to put it in here just to show you an example of a deed or what it would look like. So this brings up kind of what's related to my house. And then I'm going to click on this image on the left side. Okay, and so I typed in book 6697 and page 313. So this is the deed that's on that page. And you can see that it has who sold the house, how much they got for it, who they sold it to. This particular deed includes the name of, it includes the address, which is helpful. As you get back to the older deeds, the address won't be in there. And then the other part that I find really, really, really important is this description. And what I really like to do is to draw it out. I will create a diagram of the house lot. And not only will I put in, you know, the lengths and the dimensions that are in there, but I'll also include all of these names, the names of the abutters. The abutters can become really, really helpful, especially if the deed chain goes cold and you can't, and it doesn't list who the previous deed came from. And so I keep track of that, and it's really valuable information as you go back in time. So the goal is to keep going back in time until you find a deed that doesn't have a building. You can see that this one says with the buildings thereon, and then it gives the description. With that being said, not all deeds will say there's a building on it, if there was a building on it, which is unfortunate. So, you know, sometimes how do I know if I get to the end? You know, with the plaque program, we have a historic architect who goes in and looks at your house and looks at the building methods and the construction methods. And so that's also kind of a piece of the puzzle that we use. So, you know, if I get to what I think might be the end and she says, oh no, it's much earlier than that, then I would continue looking to see if, you know, I can see anything else. So, you know, again, if it doesn't say there's a house on it, you know, sometimes it can be. So, you know, then we have to use some different sources. Okay, so then the last part of this deed that I would look at would be down here where it shows the deed that came before it. So it said this was the same premise conveyed by this Dorothy McGlue, and then it gives a book and a page number. So I'll come up here to this little box, and I will type in 6546, the book that it says and the page that it says. And then I'll say, go to book page. And then it takes me back in time. So now I'm back here in 1978. And what I would do is I would then, you know, check to see if it still has the information. This actually says 18 Beck Street, but that's where this person lived at the time. It's not saying that's the name of the property. But to confirm that, I would have to look at the description of the property, and it matches up to what I just had on the other deed. So I know that it's the same deed chain. And then again, they give the previous deed down here, 3579, page 448. And so I just keep going back in time. But as these things go, you know, 1920s and between 1880 and 1920, a lot of times it doesn't say who sold them the house. And so that's where it gets a little muddled. And I'll show you what I do when I get to kind of that point. So that's kind of the way Salem Deeds works, you know, using this book and page. I will show you one other feature a little bit later. So let me go back to Salem Deeds. So, you know, again, I am on Salem Deeds all the time looking for that. And it's great that it's digitized, because I know that people who are title examiners have talked about having to go down to actually Salem Deeds and to take out these massive volumes of handwritten books and look through them page by page. So we're very fortunate to have this available to us. And the other thing is that Salem Deeds They have a place for you to ask questions. It's over here on the left. I don't have it in my, in that screenshot. But they're very responsive. So you can ask them a question and they're pretty good about getting back to you. And so then, you know, again, the goal is to get to the point where you have a land, a plot of land without a dwelling. So this deed is from 1796, and this is part of the same deed chain of my house. And by the way, as a former 5th grade teacher, it really is helpful to be able to read some of this writing, because some of the cursive is a little, it can be tricky to read. So if you're good at reading cursive, that's also a plus. So here's the description, you know, so this says a lot of land situate in Newburyport containing, and then notice that it says blank rods and 3/4 of a rod. So the other thing we find with some of these handwritten deeds is they're not always 100% accurate. You know, it's only as accurate as the person who was writing it. So whoever was writing this one must have looked up to take a sip of coffee and then they forgot to put how many rods there were. So that part is missing. But everything else in the deed matches up to the abutters who I'd been tracking all the way back here. And so, you know, when we get to some of these older ones, oftentimes there's not even how many feet there are. It might just say, you know, bounded northeasterly by Joseph Hoyt and not even give a dimension. So knowing who the abutters are is really, really important. And you'll also see in the earlier deeds, they talk about rods. The deeds were, they used rods and links back then. You can do a Google search and just say rods to feet, and it'll bring up a little calculator for you, and you can plug in how many rods it says, and it'll tell you how many feet it is, or vice versa. So that's always a really helpful thing to do as well. And then a lot of times, when it talks about how big the lot is, the square rods can convert to square feet. So you can, you know, if it says it's 19, it's a 19 rod lot, it's talking about 19 square rods, and you can convert it to square feet and then compare it to kind of the current size of your lot. So, you know, getting back to this point where you have just a lot of land is kind of the goal. And then we figure out then who it was who actually built the house. All right, so what happens when you need to fill in the gaps or you lose the chain of title at some point? So I already showed you the map of 1851. I'm a visual person, so I love these maps. I think these are awesome. They're also fire insurance maps, and luckily, these have been digitized at the Library of Congress. So I just noticed that during the pandemic, they added 3 more. There used to only be 2 on here, and now they have 5. So this is really great. And so they have 1906, 1888, 1894, 1914, and 1900. So if we click on, I'll just click on this 1906, and you go to view, it's a series of maps. And so the first image is kind of the overview. And so if you zoom in on it, you know, I can go in and look at Boardman Street, and it's on map number 9. So I can go up here to find map number 9, go to that page, and I can zoom in and I can see, you know, Boardman Street, here's the house. It has the old, okay, so one other thing is that many of the house numbers have changed over time. And I just learned on this last project that I did that one street, the house numbers changed twice, which is frustrating. But anyway, so the house numbers might be different from your house today than it was prior to 1915. It seems like 1915 was about the time it changed. So 29 Boardman is my house number now, but it used to be 19. So that's important to know, especially if you start to look through the old newspapers and you want to try to find something related to your particular house. Sometimes putting in your street address is helpful, but if your street address is different, you won't get the information about your house. So these insurance maps are really good, and they can help you find some really great information about your house. So there were 5 of them. And then there's one other one that's not digitized yet, and it's the map of 1926. And then they have edits from 1952, and that's available at the public library in the archival center. And on that particular map, I have a little picture over here. You can see that they show you what the old number is and then what the current number is. So this house on Atkinson Street is currently 14 Atkinson, but it used to be 8 Atkinson. So that particular map will share with you what the old address was and what the current address is. And then there's a key, you know, the pink color is brick and the yellow color is wood, and it gives you all of that information. So, you know, just a clarifying point that the houses were renumbered around 1915, and also that the street names have changed over time. So as you get back to some of the older deeds, you might be looking for your street name and then you see a different street name, and you might think to yourself, I'm just going to discount this deed. I'm not going to look at it because it doesn't have the right street name, only to realize that the street names have changed over time. And I'll show you a place where you can see where those street names have changed. So these maps, again, are really helpful. So I'm going to take you back to the Salem Deeds and show you how to use the index books. Okay, we looked at how to find the book and page and how to do a street search or to search by name. But these index books are really kind of where the slog of research happens, because there's a lot of looking around that you have to do, and sometimes it takes a long time. So let me go back to that, and I'm just going to go again into this box on the right. I'm going to click on that, and that'll take me to where all these tabs are. Come on. Okay. So I'm going to go to these index books. And so these books basically are it's a way for Salem Deeds to keep track of every person who granted a house, the grantors, and everybody who received a house, a grantee. So as you do your search and the trail kind of runs dry, this is kind of where you would look. And so I'm just going to share with you one place, an example. So these are broken down by time periods, and each one is organized a little differently, which is a little bit of a drag, but it's kind of the way it is. So there are you know, different time periods that you can search. I'm going to do one from 1850 to 1855 to 1879. So I want to see, I'm looking for somebody named Townsend who received a house, and I think it's sometime between 1855 and 1879. So I'm just going to type in the last name. I'm going to put in his first name, and then I hit search. And so then it's going to bring you up all these names. Really what this list is like who shows up at the top of the page. So it's your little page indicator. So I'm just going to take this first one. And so, you know, here they are, handwritten. So I'm looking for Charles Townsend. So I'm going to go back because this is True Townsend. Let me go back a page. I'm going to use the arrows at the top, and I'm going to go back a page. And if you notice over here on the right, it tells you different cities. So clearly I'd be looking for Newburyport. So sometimes I might just look over on the right, and when I find one that says Newburyport, then I can look at it a little bit closer. That's just a little tip. But I also need to get back. I'm only at Daniel. I'm looking for Charles. Let's see, go back one more. And then down at the bottom. Okay, so here's Charles M. Townsend, and it gives me a book and page number. And it says that he got it from Joseph L. Dockham. So let me go to this book and page. So 993-113. I'll go up to the top, type in 993-113. I'm going to go to the book and page. And so here is the description, and it says who it's from and who it went to. And then it talks about it having 14 rods with a dwelling house. So I know that the house is on it. And then it starts giving the dimensions, bounded by Boardman Street, by this abutter named Page, by somebody named Patrick Henry, and then by Atkinson Street. And so you notice that that doesn't have any of the dimensions in there, but it has the different abutters. And if I've kept track of those abutters back in time, it should match up. And then, clearly over time, those abutters will change, but oftentimes they use abutters who had been there for a long time. So again, I just keep track of that. But if you notice in this deed, it doesn't say how Joseph Dockham got the property. It doesn't give the previous book and page. And this was signed in the 25th day of February, 1878. So because it doesn't have the book and page of where Dockham got it, I now need to find out how he got it. So I would go back to my search. I'm gonna go back one more, and I would type in his name. I go to Dockham and Joseph, and then I'm going to search. And here are a whole bunch of Joseph Dockhams, which brings me to another point that many of the people clearly shown just by this particular page, this Joseph H. Dockham, he had multiple homes. There were plenty of real estate developers back then as well. And so sometimes I'd have to read through every single one of these deeds if they were from Newburyport to figure out if it was the property I'm looking for. So this is where the hunt begins. And again, sometimes you get lucky and it's right there. And sometimes it can take a long time. In fact, I had one project I was doing where I couldn't find the previous person. And it turned out that that deed didn't get filed at Salem Deeds for 100 years. So I was, of course, looking in the wrong time period, and somehow I stumbled upon it. Again, it can get a little crazy sometimes. But this is what you would do. Just keep going by time periods, back in time, looking for the person who had the house. And if it wasn't in this if I didn't find him in this 1855 to 1879, then I would go up to this tab and I would go to the time period before that. And I would find, well, first I would change it to grantee because I want to see how Dockham got the house. And then start with the, and continue working back in time. Just be careful not to jump in time because you might miss something in between. So I work methodically backwards until I find what I'm looking for. So what happens if I don't find what I'm looking for? Because that happens. Then it's time to go kind of to the next stuff. So I'm going to skip this page real fast. So these are the some of the other sources that I use, and I'm going to go back to that newspaper one in a second. So vital records is all digitized as well. So these are Newburyport. They have a whole bunch of towns throughout Massachusetts. So I might have to go and see, you know, this Dockham person, maybe who he married, or maybe when he died, what children they have. So this vital records is really helpful if you have to start looking at family members. Like if you don't have you know, you could look at Ancestry, but this is free, and it has everything right there. So this vital records can be really valuable in helping to figure it out. Because oftentimes the earlier houses were passed down from family member to family member, whereas today they go from different family to different family. So knowing who these people are and who like their children marry, because they'll have different last names, like the women who inherit the house will have a different name from their father. So these marriage records can be really valuable. Probate records can be really valuable as well. And so this American Ancestors website is helpful. It actually is a subscription-based website, but the probate documents are free. So you can access those at home. And they also don't go past 1900. So if you're looking for somebody, you know, the probate records of somebody who died after 1900, you actually have to go to Salem Deeds and to look at those. But the earlier ones, which is great, are right here. So you can look them up. And reading the wills, it's actually really quite fun because you can see, you know, I've seen people who've been taken out of wills and people who've been given a special clock or all sorts of things. And it should list their land in there if they had any land, and if they had money, and if the land could be passed down. Some people were insolvent, and so their land was taken. So the probate documents are certainly very helpful. Family genealogy, again, at the public library, you can find that. You can use the vital records to help. You could use Ancestry to help. Those are all really good resources. There's some really great history of Newburyport books by Courier, and they have the original books in the library, but they have been digitized. And so there's several, I'll have 4 of them linked for you that I'm going to send to you in the document. This particular one talks all about the streets and when they were laid out, if it was a different name, when it was renamed, all of that good stuff. So these digitized books on the history of Newburyport are really great. You could certainly use the index at the back of the book. You could just scroll all the way to the end and find, you know, what you're looking for that way. The much easier way is just to go search inside. And I'm going to put in Boardman Street. And what it'll do is it'll show up with a little flag every time the name Boardman Street pops up. So I find this helpful. I do like having the physical book in my hand, but if I can't get access to it, having this is really, really helpful. So there's a volume 1 and a volume 2. And if you hover over the little flag down there, it gives you a little bit of an overview of what it's about. So you can, you know, kind of see what was going on. And then here's where it talks about Boardman Street being laid out. And so Boardman Street was laid out in 1754. And it's always been called Boardman Street. So that's good to know as well. So some of these digitized books are a wealth of information. Courier was he has several books out there. And so if you're looking for information about a person who lived in your house, sometimes these books are helpful. Census reports, the only place that I've been able to find census reports is on Ancestry, but those can be really helpful as well. Generally when the 1860, 1870 census, they don't list the streets that they're on, but they generally went from house to house. And so if you find the name of the person who lived in your house, or if you know a neighbor, sometimes you might be able to get lucky and find some information about who lived next door. So those can be helpful. The Newburyport street directories, those are available at the library. Those are very valuable and helpful. But you have to know the person you're looking for. You can't say, I want to see who lived at 19 Boardman Street. It doesn't do it that way. I'd have to know that Cooper lived on Boardman Street, so then I would look up Cooper and then look at all the Coopers until I found someone who lived at 19 Boardman. But those are really helpful resources. There are also photographs. The library has several photographs, and also the Museum of Old Newbury has several photographs and archives, so you could go over there as well. And then cemetery records. If you know, many of these people, sometimes if you run into a dead end, you can figure out where they're buried. And maybe there's a little hint, you know, whether it's a child or a wife, a spouse, or that those are helpful to glean a little information from as well. And then Sharon Spieldenner is the head librarian in the Archival Center, and she is super, super helpful, super, super nice. I'll be sending you her email address so you don't have to write it down. But she's available. She knows I'm giving her information out, so she can help you if you run into a dead end and you have a question. She might be able to help you. And then I wanted to go back to the online database at the public library, because this has some really, really great information. So the historic newspapers have been digitized, which is really cool. And you know what, let me go one other screen first. So this is the screen that you come up to when you go to the Archival Center. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there are some historic pictures there, but there are a whole bunch of online resources that they have. So this is a great place to look. You know, it even has the information on researching your home, you know, some different places that you might be able to find information. But over here on the left is this daily news, and it goes back to 1773, which is amazing. And so when you click on it, you can do a search. So I'm going to do a search on that Charles Townsend, his name, Charles M. Townsend. And I could change the dates. I know he didn't live there until, so I'm going to put 1850. He lived there after 1850, and I'm just going to do that. And then I'm going to hit discover. And I made one mistake right there. I'm going to pull up way too many things. Let me go back. Let me do that one more time. If you use quotation marks, it'll find only what's in the quotation marks. And I didn't close out that quotation mark. So now it's going to find anything that says Charles M. Townsend versus finding everything that has Charles or everything with an M. So I'm going to discover. And, you know, so I can see a little preview here. The widow of Charles M. Townsend looks like a funeral. So maybe that's when his wife died in 1922. Here is another article. So this is where you can find some of those fun articles. This is actually an article I used for my If This House Could Talk poster a couple years ago. This story over here on the right-hand side made front page news. Charles Townsend's son threw a rock and it hit another boy and it ended up killing him. So really sad event, but it was in the front page of the news. So when I use this search tool, a couple of things. First of all, you can get sucked into it and spend hours doing it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, sometimes the program has a hard time reading the writing of the paper, so it might miss things. So I find that putting information in multiple ways sometimes helps. So I would not only search, say, Charles M. Townsend, knowing that he was somebody who lived here, but I might also put in 19 Boardman Street prior to 1915 to see if I find anything, or just Boardman Street, or just Townsend, and see if there's information that pops up. This is where you're going to find kind of those stories of your house, and some people have them and some people don't. Maybe you'll find something about something that happened on your street, for instance. And so there's some tools up here that you can use. One of them is it allows you to actually kind of take a part of it and to kind of take a screenshot of it. If I hit that arrow, it's going to take a screenshot of it, and it's going to tell you where it came from. And then you can save it to your computer. So, and there's a tutorial on how to do all that. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. The library actually has 2 YouTube tutorials. And the first one just talks about kind of how to use the basic features. And then the special features is in lesson 2. That shows you how to crop it and how to remove the little blue bar that's across the name, and a couple of other things. So you can learn a little bit more using those. So again, the newspapers are really great information. When people die, you can read their obituaries, or you can read kind of what was going on, and so you can learn a lot about the people who lived in your house. And there are going to be a lot of houses where you may not find anything, but you can get lucky there, which is great. So we have about 15 minutes left, so I wanted to show you 2 more things. We hope that everyone will add their address to If This House Could Talk. So you probably have seen this before, but there's a link, and it just takes you to a basic form, and all you have to do is put in your street address. And then what happens is we'll add it to the map. And so right now, this is where we are. I think we have 22 homes on the map. And then as we get closer to the event, we will print some of these out, and it'll be available so you'll know where there's a poster. And we hope that everyone who's joining us tonight will have a poster for sure. So now that I've gone really fast, are there any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask, or however you want, and I'll keep my tabs up, so if I need to go back to something, I can open something up pretty easily.
They've asked about street directories, whether there's any plans to digitize them.
I don't know about that. I have found that on Ancestry, if I'm looking for a particular person, and there is a place to limit it to directories, that sometimes these Newburyport ones will pop up. So
yeah, I did the same thing. You have to stumble across some Ancestry, maybe a couple other. There are some street directories,
yeah,
but not as complete as in the library.
Right.
And the ones I think after like 1890 or something are by address, so you can do them by street address.
Okay.
As an index.
Great, good. Any other questions?
Hey, Barb. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wondered how you can figure out exactly when your house is built. So, I get that you go back until there's a deed with no property, but there could be 20 years between the time the person bought the property and then built the house. Yep. And we've been given a date for our house, but how do I know that that's accurate?
Yeah, so depending on how old the house is, there are tax records as well. And those are available at the library. And so, so I've seen some as early as like 1799, so I've found some that early. They're not as detailed. I was looking at some today that were from like 1860, and it'll actually give you the address, and it'll say, you know, Charles Townsend was assessed on a house at 19 Boardman Street, the value of $1,500. So there are tax records. There was a flood at City Hall around 1861. So I think 1862 to like 1870, they're not available. And there's still these massive books that are still at City Hall that aren't available at the library. So that is the other way of doing that. And then other than that, you know, if the tax records aren't there, then, you know, we might look at when the person got married. A lot of, you know, if it's an early house, you know, oftentimes they built homes right around the time they got married, you know, and that's when, you know, as part of the Preservation Trust, that's when we kind of talk with you and we say, this is all the information we have. Here, you know, extenuating circumstances, and this would be our recommendation based on the architecture, based on the deeds, based on the tax records if we can find them, and the other information.
And are those tax records available online, or you have to go to the library to access them?
Yeah, they would be available at the library, and unfortunately the library is not open yet. But if you know a year, and you know, and again, you have to know the name of the person because they do it by person. Then Sharon might be able to help you out and take some pictures for you.
Okay.
For sure. Mark, did you have a
Barb,
question? Yeah.
Yeah. So two quick questions. So first, like, how do you deal with subdivisions? Like, you know, you may have had someone who owned a lot that had a house on it and then sold part of that lot, but on the deeds you'll find that there was a house there, right? Generally.
Yep. So I'm going through that exact situation right now, where somebody had a parcel and there was a house on it, and then they ended up selling a parcel off, and I had to use some of the tax records to help, and I had to actually look at the abutters, and I had to take their house deeds back too to figure out what their deed said and how it was all connected. So sometimes, unfortunately, that's one of the ways you get over the hump is you have to look at, I take a neighboring property and then I work that one back as well. So does that answer that question? Yeah. And was there a second part?
Yeah, so the other one was, and this might be urban myth, but you know, I hear that with the fires in 1811, 1934, that records have, like, significant numbers of records have been lost. Is that valid, or?
I think that there were records at City Hall that got lost, but the deeds, the deed records go back to, you know, early 1700s, late 1600s. So those are available. That, you know, again, tax records. You know, but there are probably some other records, and I'm trying to figure out, you know, what they might be. I'm sure there are plenty of them that got lost in fire, and again, and there's some that got damaged during the flood. So,
Okay.
You know, I think that there's a lot out there that you could still use to help date your house.
Great.
I think more has gotten lost because they misplaced them rather than fires, to tell you the truth.
And I know that Sharon is trying to get the last of the tax record books out of City Hall because they're down in the basement. They're musty, they're moldy, they're a mess. But to be able to organize them and to archive them, because they're a great source of information. They even have some file drawers that have, you know, basically index cards on every street property, and it tells you information on that. So, you know, that's fascinating information too. Anyone else? All right, so I'm going to...
I just had one thing. This is Dave Pasick.
Yeah.
Not so much on your presentation, but I used to live in the house that you're in.
Did you really?
Yeah, when Ted Nixon, you thought Theodore Nixon, when he sold it,
Yeah.
I rented it from the people that bought it.
That's pretty funny.
But I thought it was 27.
Well, yeah, it was actually a duplex. It was a single family home, and then it was turned into a duplex, and then it was converted back into a single family house before we bought it. So that's pretty funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings out a good point. I was telling Barb earlier, well, last week, that I've done a lot of research on my house, and I've always tried to follow the owners. But if you go to street directories and things like that, you get the renters, and then the number of names explodes, which is cool if you're looking for stories. So you start looking up renter names, and you find mass murderers and things like that. So so that's a source for stories if you're really looking for stories.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope that everybody will get a poster out and sign up on the map if you haven't already done so. I'll follow up with an email to everybody with a document that has all of these links in it, so you can go to those and find what you need.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yep,
Thank you.
appreciate it. Yep,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Barbara, want to hang on?
Yeah,
I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on.
okay.